In the Army, I was a platoon sergeant. I had 30 young men in a scout platoon. I became their mother and father.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, and for some, their big brother. And I took that responsibility seriously. And I had one soldier that he was no longer in my platoon, but I knew him well, Robbie, and I won't give his last name up. But I get a call one day that he's hanging from the rafters in his garage. And clearly that broke my heart. And I didn't see that coming. You know,
Most people don't.
he was a junior non-commissioned officer. He was at one time non-commissioned officer of the year. And his father was a police officer in the city of Salinas, California, and an exceptional man himself. And it turned out that it was his suicide was over a love interest.
It happens a lot with men in particular.
And it just really, that was the first time something like that happened to me. There was a non-combat death. And it just impacted me so much that the impetus for me then was I was even more motivated to be in my soldiers' lives, a part of their life, checking up on them, calling them on holidays, doing stuff like that. I'm not an exception to the rule. I was a rule. A lot of non-commissioned officers, we were the backbone of the Army. Yes, the officers commanded, but we ran the Army. And these guys were our guys, and now men and women,
right,
of course, in combat arms. And when you're in combat arms, you're in a close environment, you live together, you don't shower together, right? You're out dirty for months at a time. And it's a tough duty. But Robbie really kind of brought that was an experience for me that made me say, I need to do this even more. And I've continued to do that type mentoring stuff. I told you about the Lancaster County Veterans Court that I got involved with, and we started off here, and it's bearing great fruit, and these people are reaping benefits, both
right,
men and women veterans, who instead of going to prison, go through this program. As long as it's, like I had mentioned you off camera, as long as it's not a Megan's issue or a serious violent felony, we could help them out and kind of divert the.
I think that's important.
And it's work. The recidivism is, I think they said it was like 5%, which
it's pretty good.
That's pretty darn good.
That's pretty good. Because a record certainly does prevent people from moving forward in life.
It does.
I saw them all for programs like that.
It does.
But as you were mentioning about your friend there, there's three, I'm not even sure how to address all of the issues with mental health, because it's not just one, there's many. So they have a abuse in childhood issue, or a trauma in childhood issue, or maybe you have a narcissistic parent or a borderline parent. And part of me thinks once you've gone through that, there's some irreversible damage that goes on there, and you get anxiety disorders for life. I know if you have a narcissistic parent, they've proven that you're way more likely to have an anxiety disorder.
Sure.
And then you mentioned the relationship piece. I think that's a huge one. I'm 37, and the people my age and younger, it's not like the way it used to be with relationships where people found a way to pair bond and make it work more often than they didn't, it seemed. But nowadays, you don't see that. Nowadays, and I think a lot of it's because of social media, but a lot of guys just strike out.
Yeah.
And only a smaller percentage of men are really desirable from women. And then you get guys like your buddy there, they fall head over heels for a woman, and then it devastates them when it doesn't work out. And this is part of the reason I do what I do, is to help men in that very situation and to say to them, hey man, no woman is worth that. But we're all programmed from a young age with Disney and the soulmate stuff. It leads them astray. It leads them into this fantasy love addiction thinking. And to me, that's poison.
Well, even Shakespeare's great work of Romeo and Juliet, I mean, you look what
poison
happened there. Yeah, so
poison almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mutual.
It was a mutual thing. But I think you're right. I think some of these things are ingrained in us. You are a product of your environment, no question about it. Now, when I was a lieutenant with the department in California, when I was doing gang investigations and stuff, I would look in the central files of some of these gang members. There was commonality. The gang became their family. They no longer had what you would consider the nuclear family, or whatever you want to phrase it. Even single parent family. Sometimes they didn't even have that.
Was it about fatherless household stuff? Is that where a lot of it came from? Or?
Yeah, and then also too, you have generations of gang members, where the father was a gang member, the grandfather. And I never thought I'd see that, but of course, now that we're in 2022, of course you would have those generations. And there's a loyalty to the gang that really is sometimes incredible. I mean, it's hard to believe. I mean, I had one 17-year-old, he walked into an intersection and shot 4 people. Didn't even blink an eye. And when he showed up at I believe it was Salinas Valley State Prison for, after trial for his incarceration, he looked like he was a high schooler. And but he was a hardcore gang member, devoted to the gang, because they got control of this and this.
Well, it serves some needs in people, right? There's a community with a gang, a sense of a mission, a sense of purpose.
Right.
It accomplishes a lot of things that not many other institutions seem to be doing a good job of doing. And not to mention, as a gang member, it can be a cool thing, all these movies
and plus
and
I think it's also, when I talk to, of course, other gang members over the years, they say, hey, LT, it's survivability. It's all about that. In the hood, if you're not clicked up, you're alone.
It's like you see in The Wire.
Yeah.
Like you see The Wire, that's one of the most realistic drug shows that I have seen.
Okay.
But that's how they make it, though, right?
Yeah.
They made it out of poverty. And, they went in and out of jail. And some of them died, but they seemed to be having a good time doing it.
Yeah.
And they were enjoying themselves. And granted, you got to be a little bit of a psychopath to do it. But
and there's even an answer for these kind of things, too. It's just that we have to commit to trying to rectify. There'll always be criminal gangs. Yes. Always. It's not going away. I mean,
violence won't go away.
I mean, we've had
mental health problems won't go away.
Yeah, forever.
None of that stuff is going to go away. To me, it's all about just making sure the options are available for people that want the help.
I mean, historically, you look back, Tombstone, it was the cowboys. They were the gang, right? Then you go back further and you go to the gangs of New York, the Irish gangs, who were very violent and insular. You'll have this happen through our history, and it'll go back even further than that. So it's going to be here. The thing is, how do we contend with it? How do we fight them to get these kids back? How do we help that? It's a tall order.
Probably former gang members would be the best at doing that.
Well, I agree with you there.
And then I've also had ideas about a government program. I'm not really the biggest fan of those in general, but I feel like a good one would be, there's all these people right now that want to be like life coaches, etc. You give them a program to help the people that are in poverty, to help the people that are struggling as teenagers, and you get some of these guys that are pretty smart. You'd probably have to have some sort of means testing to make sure they're not fools, but they're smart and they can help these guys improve on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
That's what I always think about someone like Tony Robbins. I'm like, if you really wanted to help people, you would go to some of these inner cities and talk to them and learn about their lives and think, what can we do to get this person out, as opposed to having them just being reliant and dependent upon the government checks.
Well, I know they've had some programs over the years, of course. They've had the at-risk inner-city kids going to prisons, and then the inmates showing them tough love, I guess, if you want to call it that.
I've seen that, yeah.
So they've had programs like that. I think you hit it on the head, though. I think you almost have to have the been there, done there, got the T-shirt kind of deal. So you get that gang member.
Yeah, there's a guy I used to work with like that.
Who rejected that life now in his maturity, and is trying to tell these youngsters where they're going to land up, and it's not good. It's either in prison or on the slab in the coroner's office, and that's usually what happens, unfortunately. And they were getting, when you have gang affiliations, even in prison, it's hard to survive without being in a gang.
Sure.
I mean,
you need protection because it's a very violent place.
Even the system works against the independence of an individual.
So what side of that would you see? Like, so you're in law enforcement. Did you see a lot of that in the jails there?
Sure. You would have assassinations, assaults, all kinds of things that would happen. Now, the California correctional system, one of the largest in the world, maybe not as large as incarcerated people in China, but it's pretty large. I remember it being about 30 prisons or so. And at the time, and I'm going back a few years, it was about 153,000 incarcerated and maybe 160 on parole. That's a lot of people. And a lot were drug-related situations. Either you committed an act of violence over it, or robbery, or whatever, something drug-related. So that's one piece. If we could fix that, then we could make more room at the end for the violent felons.
But
I just don't know how we reduce all that. Sorry?
What do you think a solution is for the drug thing? And I know I used to work in the addiction field.
Yeah.
And I've known guys like you're talking about that used to be part of gangs, motorcycle gangs. And let me tell you, those kids, the teens, they would really respect those guys because you can sense it. You know, the kids, they only respect certain kinds of people who have been there, done that.
Sure.
That can relate to them. So he was really good at that part. But to me, like, there's always going to be drug abuse too. Like, as long as there's trauma, as long as there's anxiety and depression, there will always be drugs.
Self-medicate. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And so to me, the answer with that is, I don't think they should all be getting records for it. Like, I think it's pretty terrible that people in the 70s were being thrown away for life for weed distribution, and now it's a perfectly legitimate business.
It's a legitimate thing. And now we're giving needles out in Philadelphia.
Yeah, needle exchange.
Needle exchange, right?
Harm reduction.
So they can keep them alive for the other reasons, the antiseptic reasons. And I mean, it's a tough problem because, once again, that's something that's been around a long time. When I was a young guy growing up in New York City, a young teen, the methadone clinics were around the corner. All the hospitals had those clinics.
I've been on that before.
So so you know the drill. And that's why I respect you. When we first met, you came and told me all about your own situation. But that adds value to our conversation. It adds value.
Well, I've been there with it, so I have a unique perspective.
Absolutely.
But I think I have one of the most unique parts is being through to the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
And seeing how it is. Because what do you think about drugs like becoming legal? Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
So, I have mixed emotions about it because I don't quite know how we would do it here because, I know people talk about Europe all the time. Well, the Scandinavians do. Well, the Scandinavians do a lot.
Portugal.
Portugal. It's like night and day, really. I spent 5 years in Europe, so I was well traveled. I'd been almost everywhere. Prostitution was legal. They were selling heroin pretty openly. So they've been doing, especially the Northern Europeans, have been doing it for a pretty long time. I think they've had some positive results, but they're dynamically different, population-wise, diversity in population.
Much less diversity.
Yeah,
right?
Much less diversity. And so I think that's part of it. The other issue is, how do we really regulate this? How do we do this? I mean, because and I know, if we legalize heroin, for example.
No more fentanyl deaths, maybe.
Well, you're right. Maybe no more fentanyl deaths. But does it really mean no more fentanyl deaths? Because, again, let me go back to the border. Much of this stuff is coming over through Mexico. Mexico has had this kind of uncomfortable business relationship with China. And we've already established that a lot of these pills are coming from China.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know what we're doing about it. Politically, governmentally, I don't know anything.
So I'm torn on the subject myself. I feel like it'd be good to not be giving people criminal records and becoming felons, especially just for a possession charge.
Yeah.
They're felons now.
My problem,
just for getting a possession charge.
I think the more people that when you legalize it, I think, yes, people will come out into the sunlight, but also you're putting the public more at risk. I think, especially with heroin.
Well, the question to ask is, how many people that are not doing it already would want to do it just because it's legal? Like, the people who want to do it, they're going to do it regardless of its legality.
What happened to the price of marijuana when the government got a hold of it?
Oh, it got higher. So there's still going to be...
So you know what happened up in Northern California where they grow this stuff, and they hadn't grown it for a while. They're growing it again because they're being competitive with the government's price. Same thing with the cartels. The cartels know like Denver, for example, one of the first cities to really do this. They jacked the price up of marijuana. So where are they buying it? They're buying it on the black market.
Right.
So, and you still don't know what kind of product you're getting, what they're putting into it or on it. When I was a young guy, angel dust was the thing. You sprinkle a little angel dust on your joint and it takes you to a new level. PCP, right. Yeah, exactly. The street language angel dust, right? So I don't know, because there are people profiting from this, and it's ugly. And I truly believe there are people profiting from the fentanyl. And they could care
Of course
less
there
about,
are.
because the rationale is, well, why would you want to kill your customer? I say, because they don't care. They don't care.
It is bad business to kill the customer.
Absolutely, I agree. It's not a great business model, but they don't care.
Well, that part, they're both true, right? And unfortunately, I do know there's addicts that when they know there's a stronger batch of something, that is where they're going to go.
Yeah.
So it could almost be business in a way too. Unfortunately, it's more of like a sacrifice.
I was kind of glad when they got rid of the whole marijuana thing. Most states now, I think, maybe not all, but most states have legalized it in some way, I would believe. I'm not sure on the numbers, so don't quote me on it. But I think police are glad.
I know there's police groups that want it legal.
Because the court system is crazy. I think police now in New York, it takes several hours to book somebody in. You're taking cops off the street, and that was from a friend I have who works there. And it's kind of this. It's like we're at 340 million people now, or somewhere around there. It's sort of like our infrastructure can no longer support the population, the judicial system, the police, and we're downsizing or defunding or whatever the word is today of police. It's kind of we're in a bad way right now.
Well,
we need some concrete governance and leadership, and we just are not getting that.
Well, there's a few things to say about that. You could say that our empire is just kind of coming to its end here, where an average empire is a couple hundred years, a little more. That's about how long we've been around. So that part makes sense too. I think we got a lot of legal issues going on. Our justice system is all out of control.
Yeah.
I'd seen something just the other day about senators caught again for insider trading. And guess what their fine is for that?
Oh, yeah. It wouldn't even cut into their
$100
interest.
fine for the insider trading.
Right.
And so what do we expect is going to happen when
of course.
the people who are in charge of making the laws, are they going to really regulate themselves?
Right.
No one ever goes into politics poorer than when they went in.
Yeah.
So, but to me,
and that's probably one of the only things that they get agreement on.
Yes.
is that they both can.
Well, the only way things are ever really going to change is if non-Republicans or Democrats, outsiders, true outsiders like a Ross Perot, come in there and shake things up.
Yeah. The thing is, I don't know if a third party or an independent party could gain any traction, because I think almost sometimes that they have a protection racket going on, the Democrats and the Republicans.
They do.
They attack each other, but on the same note, they, like you talked about earlier, through legislation, protect each other. And it's kind of sad, really, because it's a small circle, and the American people are not benefiting from it.
We do outnumber them. Now, because there are some sheep. There's Republican sheep.
Sure.
There's Democrat sheep.
Yep.
But I think one of these days we're going to get to a point where people finally feel like they're not throwing away their votes to vote third party. Because like you said, the only thing Republicans and Democrats agree on, really, is some financial interests and making sure there's no other viable third parties.
Yeah.
Ever since Ross Perot made a fool out of Bush and Clinton in '92, they made the requirements for a third-party candidate to get into the debate so high, no one's ever been there since.
Yeah.
But I think people are kind of catching on a little bit that not too much is going to change as long as it's just a two-party system. We only have one more choice than for president in communist Russia, for example, is the old expression.
Right.
But there's also an expression that says if voting really changed anything, they would make it illegal.
Yeah. I mean, I remember this one older gentleman, we got into a discussion about it, and he said, if people think that there could never be another civil war in this country, that would be very arrogant. And I understood kind of what he was saying. Of course, the connotation immediately goes to the previous civil war. But I could see his point of view. He was latter in his life, into his 80s, and he was just looking at the country, a very changed one from the one he came into. And again, I just don't think we're growing our infrastructure with our population. And I actually think our census is way off. I actually think we have a lot more people here than that. And we need to be able to support, if we're going to allow people to continue to migrate in, which, we're America, we should do that, legal migration. Then, and we need to figure out what legal migration is, by the way.
Well, that's something to talk about.
There's so much ambiguity there. But President Roosevelt back in the 40s, he had this program called the Braceros program, where Mexican citizens could come across the border, work in all of the farm fields and work their hearts out for little pay, but yet be able to send that pay back.
Right.
And then come seasonally back and forth. There was a system. Maybe it wasn't the greatest and most technological or whatever, but it was a system that allowed for it. Because frankly, Americans weren't going to work in the fields anymore. They were, how the situation is. You come in as a migrant, one generation was the Irish or the Italians or the Jews or
right.
whoever. Of course, African Americans, as they migrated north, had to start at the bottom and raise themselves up. And so now we're seeing that across the border. The only difference now is we're not just getting Mexicans. We're getting people from all over the world. And, I have a great love for the Mexican people. My wife happens to be of Mexican heritage, and she's taught me so much about the culture. And being in California, it's part of everyday life. They have generations of Mexicans there who are in government, in the fire department, the police forces, just like every other migrant group. They came through civil service into leadership, and it's truly the American dream. Now, I don't want to paint a rosy picture because things are a little still ugly in places, in the United States.
Well, my brother, he works for the government, and he says in regards to the border, they have these like deterrents, but people use it as issues to grandstand on come politics, right?
Yeah.
Come elections, they got to have their free open border thing or no tighter border, and they have their talking points, right? But what would you think would be some pragmatic solutions to what's going on there now? Do you have any?
On the border?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to almost like a Braceros type program. First of all, put the infrastructure down there. There should be places that you could come into legally and maybe even a trans-country bus service that delivers people to these stations where they can check in. And when they check in, we get fingerprints and so forth. And now, with the availability of all this digital equipment, you put a couple of prints down and you're out and about. They've got your picture and everything else. They know a little bit more about you. Right now, we don't know who's coming across the border. We've already incarcerated people who are guilty for violent felonies, and we've got them on, some of them, not all of them, on hold. We've even discovered some people with terrorist ties. And that's not hyperbole, that's fact.
Right.
Those are direct reports from the Border Patrol. And so if we set that infrastructure down and we put out any kind of ground surveillance radar, I don't know if we need to put a wall, but have something there. But if you give the incentive where if you come in and check in legally, you have an opportunity to work, they'll establish a work visa for you, whatever, in a turnaround time. And not that you need to return to court, but that you need to check in for an extension or whatever the mitigating circumstances. I think we can do that. And from what I know of the people, especially, and I'll key in on the Mexican people since I know them the best, they are hardworking, loyal, good people. And they deserve the opportunity. I think other folks are coming that way because they see it as the only avenue because of the president's words. So the president, he triggered this. There's no doubt. And he owns it, and I think he understands that he owns it.
Which president?
President Biden.
Okay.
Yeah, his verbiage, he kind of said, hey, we're open for business and letting them in. And unfortunately, the Border Patrol can't handle it. So there's so many people that are getting in. And by the way, a lot of them are, not a lot, but a lot of the ones that are incarcerated for good reasons, because they were trafficking in narcotics, or they had a Interpol hold, or something like the international police hold, and something like that. But just for migrating, I think we can have a simple system, and put them to work. There's plenty of work. In fact, right now, what are most businesses looking for? They're looking for employees, especially in the service industry.
Sure.
We can fulfill that. We can do that and allow them to earn money instead of being on a program. Now, there are a lot of non-governmental agencies involved, and they're doing great work and trying to help these folks out. But they are human beings, and they're coming here. Most are coming here for great opportunity.
No, I mean, I respect the hell out of them because they work harder than 9 out of 10 Americans do. That's for sure.
In other words, an Ellis Island on the southern border, if I could put it that way.
What about, I know the big talking point always seems to be about the kids in cages thing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? How does that come about?
Well, I think that's political hyperbole, only because they were put in during the Obama administration. So what were they going to use them for? Of course they were going to use them to segregate folks. Because once you take custody of people, all right, I'm an officer, I'm on the streets, I decide that this suspect needs to be held for further investigation or for incarceration and judicial process. So once I put the cuffs on that individual, they're my responsibility. Even if they trip on a crack in the cement, if they fall down and I'm not holding on to them, that is on me. So you can see why they would have to separate and segregate. So if you get a young woman and her daughter and you put her in a holding cell with all men who you don't know anything about yet, do you think you're taking a little gamble there? Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's because they're being overwhelmed. The Border Patrol really has not been given the tools. And Secretary Mayorkas, unfortunately, is not the right man for the job. And I will say that out in the open. I think everybody knows it by now. His interviews have not gone well. And he doesn't seem like the type who has the fresh ideas to make this work.
So is it more of a funding issue or more of a training issue?
Yeah, I hate to say it's a funding issue because we throw so much money at so many things. I don't know if that's it. But if you're going to have this volume, especially if they lift Article 42, if you're going to have this volume, you need to have the staff to support it. And right now the Border Patrol is overwhelmed. Overwhelmed.
And what is Article 42?
Yeah, it's that one that had to do with COVID. And it's the relationship of how people come over, whether or not they have COVID. It was put in there under emergency circumstance. And if they lift it, it's just going to be a free-for-all, is my understanding. So you can read more about that. It's available online.
You were talking before about our infrastructure, and you think that we're not able to keep up with it. What are some of your thoughts on how to start doing that? Because you think the census is wrong. We probably have more people than it says we do. Mm-hmm. But what can we even begin to do to tackle that kind of issue?
Well, I think the first thing is, and to some degree it has to do with immigration, legal immigration or migration. People are afraid to talk to anybody who's taking names or numbers in census, because they may not be here on papers.
Understandably so in some cases.
And I think they're literally now probably in the millions. I used to think they were in the hundreds of thousands, but now they could be in the millions of people.
So you think these are illegal immigrants more so?
And have you ever looked at, I've looked at old census through Ancestry, and they have these things where you could see your great-grandfather where he was at this time in the 1920 census.
Because it was all tracked.
And then I looked at it, and I knew how many children he had at that time, and even that was inaccurate, when I looked at it. That's just a small kind of example of this was done by volunteers or temporary employees who mark things down on a sheet. So now it's a little more in-depth, but still, it's still the same. People walk around and they're looking at how many children and all this kind of stuff. People are reticent to answer those type of questions.
Right. So part of the infrastructure umbrella to you,
sure,
there's highways, bridges, mental health facilities, maybe even healthcare stuff too, because that's one of the things in America here we're really off the reservation with, really.
Yeah. So Eisenhower he's responsible for a lot of the major highways going across country, which helped transportation of goods, which helped business. I mean, it's a domino effect. You just came through a horrific experience on the Schuylkill, right? I mean, that thing is always like that. They spend hours, and you talk about gas consumption and pollution and the lack of availability in transportation to get goods from A to B. These things are too crowded now. So we have to look at highways, roads. Pennsylvania is a state of secondary roads. If you don't know the secondary roads here, you're going to be lost.
Sure.
So we need to look at doing a comprehensive program on that. And the problem is, I think, when we allocate money, then you get into these contracts with companies, and they're not always on the up and up. In fact, I would imagine they're friends of a friend of a friend.
Sure.
It starts out with this senator and it ends up down here. and never gets done properly or never gets done at all. We've invested a lot in bridges, and look at our bridges. Our bridges are
But it's not even about just the funding, right? It's making sure the money's spent well.
following up.
Because some of this is, I mean, how else do you do it though? Besides, you had to get more tax money. But I think the first step is not more tax money, but just making sure the money they're already getting is used more efficiently.
Yeah, and look at the money that was spent in these last couple of years, and where did it go? I know over $100 billion of the COVID fund money went to illegal sources. $100 billion.
How much?
$100 billion.
To illegal sources?
Illegal sources, people who illegally gain those funds.
Well, I mean, this is why people get cynical about things.
This is exactly why they.
This is what, I mean, people get cynical about the government because this is what winds up happening. I would talk to local groups in Camden, New Jersey. They were doing after-school programs, and they would always tell me more money, more problems. And I didn't believe that was the case. But when they're telling me that, maybe they said there's plenty of money here. It's just not being used properly. It's not being used efficiently. So how do we make sure they use the money they do have more efficiently? What power does an individual voter have to try to make sure that happens?
Well, I think you just said it, the individual voter. We need to hold everybody accountable. Now, parents have been doing that with school boards, for example. If you notice, those meetings have been very contentious, but when was the last time you saw parent involvement like this?
Well, because it's turned into a fiasco.
It's been a while, and it's over many different things within those boards. It's not just one
COVID,
thing.
sexuality,
right. It's about
all
lesson
sorts.
plans and the 1619 project, critical race theory, and all of these things. And listen, you and I have talked about this. You know, I was a soldier at one time and a police officer. Now I'm a retired philosopher for the most part. I get to be that, right? And so I think about a lot of these things, and I research these things. And I recently read Nicole Hannah-Jones' book. You and I shared a little bit of that. And I like it as a piece of literature. I like that independent people, African-American and others, have added something to this, poetry and other alliteration. I think before you complain about something, you should always look into it first and research it.
Sure.
I mean, you have the right to complain about anything you want, but if you really want to have that true rhetorical argument with someone, you should have some background on it. So that's why before I was going to complain about the 1619 Project or critical race theory, I should read the book. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through, and I'm taking it slowly because I'm looking at every word, I'm looking at every sentence, every paragraph. I do like that she has many people in this book. She only writes a little part of this. There are many other authors, to include poets and other journalists and economists. And I almost feel like I'm listening to a segment possibly of the African American community. Maybe this is what some believe. Maybe this is what some are concerned about. I don't think she speaks for the whole community, nor do I speak for any community.
When you read Robin DiAngelo's book, right? What was her book or his book?
Angry White something or other.
Something
like that. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
But what is the message you're getting from these books?
Well, I didn't read that book.
Okay.
I didn't read that book. I read Clint Smith's book, which was kind of uplifting. I read a couple other historians and their perspectives on the Civil War and the failures of Reconstruction. I reread Frederick Douglass's autobiography because I think that's the seminal work, to be honest with you.
I actually never read that.
And they're even trying to cancel him. And I think he is a heroic figure in our history.
What's the reasoning for wanting to cancel him?
Just because they don't want the past and how they were. He handled it like a true person who experienced something. He was articulate. He handled it in an academic way by writing it down. And he did it in several versions, which I think is important. And I think this is the new, and this is what they want going for. They want progressives. You know, so if they consider themselves progressive, then you're regressive, I guess.
Teddy Roosevelt, who there's been a documentary on the History Channel the last 2 nights, but he almost got canceled back then for having Frederick Douglass to dinner. I think he was the first person to invite a black man to the White House, and he got a lot of backlash for that, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's an interesting, I'm going to actually look into that. I mean, listen, I think he was a heroic man. what he went through. If you get an opportunity to read his autobiography, I'm sure it's available on Kindle in several versions. It is a very uplifting book that it's very sad. It's painful to look at your American family and look at our history and see this.
Sure.
Anybody who is not pained by this, there's something wrong with them, because this was the way it was, and we're getting it firsthand from this man who not only survived that, but went to great heights.
Right.
And he laid the foundation for many others to come after him. And I just find it hard to believe that anybody, first of all, anybody can come under critical examination. Me, you, Frederick Douglass, anybody. But be fair about it and point out all the facts, the mitigating issues, the aggravating issues, all those things.
I know for me, reading Obama's book that he wrote in the early 90s, I think before he became senator of Illinois, like Letters from His Father, I think it was called, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But that really did open my eyes to how maybe African Americans look at it in this country. I didn't realize it was to the extent of which he was talking about, but as I was reading it, and then I apply his philosophy when I look around and I see like how things are going, I'm like, oh, I can see what he's talking about now that I'm seeing it through the Obama lens. Now, granted, I don't think some of the, and this is how we're going to come full circle here.
Okay.
So Obama, he was talking about the Uvalde shooting, and he said, let us not forget on this day that 2 years ago it was George Floyd that was, and he turned it into a George Floyd thing. Because I think Obama can be pretty divisive when it comes down to it. He's got maybe some good intentions, perhaps, but the results of what he does, it certainly doesn't unite a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we were going to talk about the Minneapolis thing, and I've seen, so that what Chauvin did was certainly wrong. But I actually kind of felt bad for the other officer there. That was like his first week on the job. And then he got sentenced to prison for not pushing him off of George Floyd. And I thought about that for a minute. I was like, could you imagine? It's your first week on the job, and here's Mr. Chauvin there, Officer Chauvin, a decade-plus veteran of the police force, and you're on your first week supposedly learning from the veteran, and you're supposed to push him off of him or you go to jail.
Right.
That's a tall order. I don't know of anyone who would have done that, really. I don't know.
So when you're, how do I put this? When you're a new officer, a young officer, whether you're a rookie or you're in your first 5 years, because for me, I got to tell you, to be a good police officer, it's going to take you about 5 years.
Sure.
It's going to take you about 5 years and some maturity, some quick maturity. Again, we don't have the same training for all police officers. I'll give you one example. The California Highway Patrol has an academy. It's very tough. It's 27 weeks long. You have to have an education. You have to be able to write. You have to be physically fit, all these things. Not every police department has those standards, nor should they, I guess. But we have to have the same hiring standards. We have to have qualified people who have good mental health, who are physically fit, right? And who can clear a background check, okay? I think that this young officer, unfortunately, he fell prey to the bull in charge. And the bull in charge was Derek Chauvin. And he should have challenged Chauvin professionally, but verbally, and said to him, and I do this in retrospect, although I probably would have done it myself, lean over and pick him up, you need to put him in the car.
I would say it's a tall order depending on the person.
And if you said that, you might have had some less culpability, because I think it's important to let your partners know where you stand. What he did that day, Derek Chauvin, was wrong. Period. End of story. Was it criminal? Well, a jury decided that, and he's going to prison. Okay? But I think the word is out there now, and unfortunately, maybe Pete Arredondo down in Texas had some of this on his mind, that culpability, that legal standard, that civil standard for what can happen to you if you make the wrong decision. And that weighs on a lot of people in law enforcement. That doesn't mean they still don't do their jobs, because 99.9% of them go out there every day and do that job. 72 police officers have been killed in the line of duty, not by accidents, by felonious activity. 72. That says volumes about our country.
Well, just this year, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, right now, being a police officer, I think doesn't always attract the best kind of person because it's the least amount of work to get to the most amount of power.
Let me argue that, because that came up. I was in a philosophy lecture one, and a young student, college student, she said, well, most of the day they don't do anything. I said, where are you from?
Well, I mean, least amount of work to become an officer.
Well, again, it depends on what department you're going to. If you're going to the NYPD, the CHP, one of these bigger departments, you go through a lot of hoops before you get there. Then even when you graduate from the academy, if your department has it, you are with an FTO for a period of time, field training officer. You don't get to ride alone right away. Not in most departments. And if departments aren't doing that, I think they're missing the boat on this one. But you go through a process. But it is a job like you've never imagined. I don't think they can really hammer it home for you of what you're going to face on a daily basis. And you have to somehow maintain this homeostasis of calm, confidence, and be this knowledgeable person. And conflict resolution is an art form.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. And it's something that's learned over time. So you have a 23-year-old officer going out there, right, with a sidearm, and you're putting him out there in this community, and everything could be going right. It only takes that 1 minute, that 60 seconds, for everything to go wrong. It is a challenging job. It is a demanding job, and it requires the best people. And hopefully the plurality of Americans, which I think they do, support them on a daily basis.
I think it might be closer to 50-50 in some cases now.
Allow me to be a little optimistic.
Well, I mean, I do think the people who don't support them,
right.
They don't put themselves in their shoes, right? They don't give them any credit because it is a thankless job, like I said before, and they just want to think the worst of them.
Yeah.
Right? And some of these decisions that are made, they're made in a split second, where if you make the wrong decision in the split second, you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's something that I don't think they take into account at all.
Yeah.
And a lot of it turns into race discussion because that's what ultimately a lot of it has come down to for a lot of people. They'll say we have a racist police force.
Yeah.
But which I also think that misses the mark too, because some of the worst police shootings I've ever seen was of that guy in Arizona, and that was a white person killing another white person.
Yeah.
So I think some of that discussion's a little disingenuous.
Yeah.
I think it happens to anyone, not just them.
I mean, I know that the history of police forces in the United States don't have a great record when it comes to race relations. Let's just face it.
Yes.
There's a long history there. And so I don't blame people for being suspect. Then also too for immigrants, if you're from another country, like Mexico, there's a lot of corruption in their law enforcement. A lot. Not a little, a lot. And I'm sure they have good police officers, and I don't know how they're surviving. But they may bring that with them, like not to trust the police right out the gate.
Sure.
I don't think that's unusual. So that's why, as a law enforcement officer, you have to figure that out. And if it's a few words, for example, in Spanish, or if it's getting someone to mediate between you, maybe a neighbor or somebody like that, to be a little more creative when it comes to dealing with the public. And if your public is primarily Latino or Asian or African American, you really need to work with the community and communicate well. Communicating well, this will save you from using this.
Sure. Well, I'm all for them using the least amount of force necessary.
Absolutely.
In a lot of these cases, and that's not always what it seems like happens. Right?
No, you're absolutely right, but that is kind of the standard, the minimum force necessary to bring somebody into compliance, right? But I will say that because governments are so reactive, if you take away the taser and you take away the pepper spray, what's the only option you have?
Well, your gun.
You don't want that. You want pepper spray. People will recover from pepper spray.
Are people even pushing for that? They're pushing.
Yeah, in some places they have, and I know in a lot of places taser, because for some people it could cause an electrophysiological problem.
Yeah.
So I get that. In pepper spray, for some folks, I guess it's an asthmatic issue, but it's real small, the population, because what is pepper spray? Oleoresin capsicum. It's garden variety pepper with an oil, so it adheres to you.
Right.
And I've been pepper sprayed before a couple of times. And
you have to for training, right?
In training, yeah. And actually in a riot once, another lieutenant sprayed me, and that's, So the bottom line is, you get over it. It is irritating. It could irritate your skin. You could have a reaction. It's very possible. But it's a less lethal force option. I don't want everybody to reach for their gun the first thing. And a lot of police officers don't. They're very calm. We see the ones that go bad, right? There's plenty of videos out there.
Right, and that's the bad optics part. Where
but you have 700,000 officers in this country working every day.
Well, part of this is the media's fault for promoting this inflammatory stories.
Yeah, well, they need to report the news and leave the editorials for the editorial hour.
Well, if they just covered it honestly,
yeah,
and they showed all of the police shootings,
sure,
then you would see maybe it's not just a racist picture.
Yeah.
But the bad optics would be something like when a 12-year-old has a toy gun that they think is a gun and they can't wait to shoot him, or they do shoot him. I shouldn't say they can't wait to shoot him.
And that has happened.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
And then you see, well, Mr. Uvalde police officers, here's your chance. Here's your chance to do something and be a hero.
Yeah.
And it seems like many of them just kind of dropped the ball. So that's another part of bad optics. But like you said before, the police chief, maybe he had a lot to do with that. But I would be very curious, like what their thinking was throughout that whole process.
I'm always surprised by these events because I choose to be, because I want to look at them closely, examine them, and then come up with ideas to see how we can do this. But even though I'm outside of law enforcement now, outside of the military, they are still part of my family. And I know that over the years that I've worked in uniform in both the American military and, of course, California law enforcement, I worked with great people of integrity. And I don't want them to be tarnished by these events. And a lot of my compatriots have also retired now, as you might imagine. And we are all concerned for our younger generation of officers, and we hope that they get the tools that they need and the support that they need. Because community support, when somebody comes up to you and thanks you for your service, that's an awesome thing. Now,
sure.
I have a habit of sometimes wearing, like today I'm wearing a Ranger shirt because having gone to Ranger school, I was very proud of that accomplishment, of course. But I continue to be proud of, and especially on this Memorial Day, which Kathy and I, being both veterans, was a quiet day for us. That's a day that we memorialize all our relationships that we had and have been lost. And then we celebrate on Veterans Day on July the 4th and all these other days. But Memorial Day is kind of a quiet day. We put out the flag, but other than that. And I think the response from Americans in my careers has been very positive over the years. I've always gotten a handshake, even in a police uniform, which is awesome. Or somebody wants to buy you a cup of coffee, or something like that. There's a lot of good people out there. I'm optimistic. All we need is a bit of strong national leadership. I'm hoping we get that someday.
Well, they say that we can't expect our leaders to rise too far above the level of thought of the people.
Right.
And so when you see things like TikTok exploding and
sure.
just the lowest common denominator stuff like doing really good,
yeah,
how are we going to ever get better? And then you mentioned Memorial Day.
Yeah.
A lot of people just use Memorial Day as to go down the shore and to drink and party it up. And no one really not too many think about the rest of it unless they have a personal tie to it like you do.
Yeah, well, I think the dynamic has changed because, in World War II, you had so many people that went overseas to fight.
Sure.
That almost every family had a family or service member in their family. And, less than 1% of the population now have people that actually serve in the active military. And that's not a bad thing, because we shouldn't be fighting wars all over the world, for crying out loud. We need to fight when we need to fight. But it's kind of hard to determine where the next fight is coming from right now, because things are looking a little bit ugly all over the world again. And I'm concerned about it, and it falls back to national leadership. But what we can do is get out there, and we just recently had some primaries to vote. We've got the midterms upcoming, and as good citizens, whether you agree with the system or not, whether you like this candidate or that candidate, get out there and vote. I think it's so important. People complain that the government's not doing this, not doing that. Votes make a difference, especially if you've seen some of these elections here in Pennsylvania. You and I have talked about it. The elections have been so close.
900 votes
Yeah.
separating Oz and McCormick right now.
Yeah.
And there's some semi-fiascos going on with it too. But 900 votes out of over 1 million
Yeah.
is not very many.
No, it's not. It's a small percentage, and of course, it's being recounted in the fashion that Pennsylvania has chose to do it in, which is a little complex.
Well, that's a whole nother,
that's a whole
other ball of wax
hour
there.
period.
But I would say also, just as a country, most people, there's not as much gratitude as a country anymore. If anything, I see a lot of people they can't stand America. And they think this is terrible. Look at our healthcare. We're so far behind all of these socialized medicine countries.
Yeah.
Look at our police force. They're terrible.
Yeah.
Look at all the gun violence we have. This is terrible.
Yeah.
People will just emphasize the negative,
Yeah.
and they neglect most of the positive. But part of the positive to me is, well, why are all these people coming here from all these other countries if it's really so terrible here? Right? There's got to be something going on for us here. There's got to be some sort of opportunity here, or why is everyone coming?
Yeah. I mean, I think like you said, I think I like to accentuate the positive. I recognize the things that are negative. I take them seriously. I may seem that I'm biased towards police. Well, that's a family issue. They're part of my family. I know, you have bad seeds everywhere.
Sure.
In the clergy, I had a doctor who drove around with his dead wife for 2 weeks in his car after he killed her. I mean, they come from all walks of life, so I don't go by that vocation thing. It's just that we put young people in uniform in impossible situations, and we expect them to come out like angels. And it's not always going to be that way.
Police or the military?
The police and the military. You put young people in situations that are sometimes untenable, and you expect them to solve them. Where you have leaders that are 60, 70, 80, they're politicians for 50 years and still I can't remember their name the next day. And I think the standard is clearly unequal. And so I have my strong opinions about that. But now that I'm older and I'm retired from both, I get to be that philosopher I talked to you about. And if you know anything about Socrates, Socrates was a veteran. He was the veteran of the Peloponnesian War. And he turned out to be a philosopher. Later on, Wittgenstein, he would serve in the military. He became a great philosopher. So that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, is philosophize about these things.
Well, I'd say,
but contribute to society. Every citizen has a duty in some way to contribute to society. And I don't mean money. I mean with your time. And if it can be mentoring, if it can be teaching, if it can be any of those things to help out, even if it's through your religious organization, all these things add to our lives. These non-governmental agencies, I find, are sometimes more effective, most times more effective than the governmental agencies.
No, I could easily see that.
Yeah.
But what's the best way to get that going, though? Like through what channels? Would it be school?
So, start at
churches,
the local
other
level,
groups?
read the local newspapers. They're always looking for volunteers. They're great in Lancaster County here because when they look for volunteers, they kind of put it out there. The word gets out there. I'm sure it's that way in other communities as well. And it doesn't matter what age you are. In fact, I think when you get older, you have more time, you have more opportunity to do this, and you should do it. And I've done my share of volunteering, and we'll continue to do it in the future. My wife has volunteered, and we have an adult daughter on the West Coast, and she knows how we feel about that, about contributing back to society in some way. And so anyway.
Well, this is a unique area here, though, too. Lancaster. On my way here, I had to drive around horse and buggies with their little red brake lights on the back. But that's something, I don't know if you see that anywhere else in America.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, I know they have Amish communities in other states, like in Missouri and
I didn't know that.
Ohio. They have the different sects of Amish, and they do the same thing. Yeah, I wouldn't know that if I didn't move here, though.
Right.
And so now that we're here well over a decade, I think we're coming up on 13 years. It's such a wonderful place to live. It's there are great Americans that live
family
here.
oriented here too. I think that's another big difference from where I am in New Jersey. It's not as community and family driven.
Yeah, and we have
where
the city of Lancaster, not far away, 11 miles from here, which is a city that's over 400 years old, and it is becoming a very metropolitan, diverse community that's really thriving now. And so I think Lancaster County is a great place to live.
All right. Well, I guess before we wrap up here, is there any of the subjects that we talked about you want to emphasize a little more, or anything else you wanted to add on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's been great to talk to you. I think the opportunity to get on your channel to express my views has been good for me, and I hope good for everybody who's listening and watching. And I look forward to the next time we talk.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good for them to hear your perspective, specifically as a law enforcement officer. I think people they don't listen, or they don't seek it out to hear someone like yours perspective that has a pretty level-headed perspective with some nuance, and that's pretty rare for these days. So.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, since I've been retired, there's been a dynamic change in police work, and I'm not as familiar with some of the more current methods and techniques, but for the most part, it's a job where you have to be prepared. And I know that they train constantly, because we train constantly. In fact, my wife and I were both parts of the hostage negotiation management team, and we always trained on those issues, and that's how we stayed ready. And I threw that in there at the end, so you can come back at another time we can talk about that.
That was a good segue.
Yeah.
What do they call that?
Sure.
Not a segue. What's the word I'm thinking of, though, that they call that?
It's
a hook.
A hook.
The hook is what it's
for the
called.
next time around.
But again, thanks for coming on,
Jared.
Rick. Just appreciate it.
Talk to you.
Have a good one, everyone. So what we'll do with that, I'll cut this all up into all sorts of segments, because I feel like that gets.
So you'll make 4 videos